The Zephyrian fleet hung in space like a collection of gleaming daggers pointed at the heart of the Terran colony of New Haven. Admiral Kextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Inevitable Dawn, watching the pathetic human settlement grow larger on his display screens. His 4 eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he observed the primitive structures scattered across the planet's surface. Admiral, his tactical officer, Commander Velnoth, approached with data tablets clutched in his 6-fingered hands. Final reconnaissance confirms what we suspected. The human colony has no orbital defenses, no military installations of note, and approximately 12,000 civilians. Kextar's mandibles clicked in amusement. 12,000? I brought a fleet capable of glassing worlds with millions. This will be like crushing insects with a warhammer. The bridge crew shared appreciative hisses of laughter. The Zephyrian hegemony had conquered 17 different species across the galaxy. Humans were simply the 18th, and by far the weakest, they had encountered. Sir, Velnoth continued, consulting his tablets, intelligence reports suggest this colony was established only 6 standard years ago. They're primarily agricultural, with some mining operations. No significant technology beyond basic terraforming equipment. Perfect, Kextar said, his tail swishing with pleasure. A clean conquest. We'll take the colony intact, process the humans for labor, and establish another productive world for the hegemony. Signal the fleet to begin descent. The massive Zephyrian vessels moved with practiced precision. Each ship was a masterwork of alien engineering, bristling with plasma cannons and particle beam arrays. Their hulls gleamed with energy shields that could deflect nuclear weapons like raindrops. The smallest frigate in the fleet carried enough firepower to level a human city. On the planet below, Colonial Administrator Sarah Chen stood in the Emergency Command Center, watching the alien ships descend through New Haven's atmosphere. Her hands trembled slightly as she activated the colony's communication systems. "This is New Haven Colony to any ships in the area," she broadcast on all frequencies. "We are under attack by unknown alien vessels, requesting immediate assistance." The response was static. New Haven sat on the edge of human space, 3 weeks from the nearest military outpost. They were alone. "Ma'am," said Marcus Webb, the colony's security chief, "we've got maybe 50 hunting rifles and some construction explosives. Against that?" He gestured at the massive ships now visible through the command center's windows. "We might as well throw rocks," Sarah nodded grimly. "Then we evacuate who we can and hope they're looking for prisoners, not corpses." The lead Zephyrian ship settled onto the colony's main landing pad with a ground-shaking thud. The vessel was easily the size of a city block, its dark hull inscribed with flowing alien script that seemed to shift in the light. Steam hissed from venting systems as the ship's massive cargo bay doors began to open. Kextar emerged first, his ceremonial armor gleaming in New Haven's pale sunlight. He stood over 8 feet tall, his reptilian features marked by the ritual scars of conquest. Behind him marched 200 Zephyrian soldiers, their plasma rifles charged and ready. Each warrior wore powered armor that enhanced their already formidable strength and speed. "Humans of this settlement," Kexatar's voice boomed across the landing area, amplified by his armor's speakers. "I am Admiral Kextar of the Zephyrian hegemony. Your world now belongs to us. You will surrender immediately and submit to processing. Any resistance will result in immediate termination." Sarah emerged from the command center with her hands raised, followed by Marcus and a dozen other colonists. "I'm Sarah Chen, administrator of this colony. We surrender." Kextar studied the small group with obvious disappointment. "This is all? Where are your warriors, your defenses?" "We're farmers and miners," Sarah said quietly. "We don't have warriors." The Admiral's mandibles clicked in disbelief. "No warriors? How do you protect your territory? How do you expand your holdings?" "We don't," Marcus answered. We just want to live in peace." A wave of hissing laughter rippled through the Zephyrian ranks. Kextar turned to Velnoth. "Commander, I've changed my mind about this conquest. These aren't even worthy of slavery. They're too weak, too passive. Signal the fleet to prepare for orbital bombardment. We'll clear this world and start fresh with proper colonists." "Wait," Sarah stepped forward. "Please, there are children here, families. We'll serve you however you want." "Worthless prey species deserve only extinction," Kextar replied coldly. "You lack the strength to fight, the intelligence to defend yourselves, and the will to conquer others. The galaxy has no place for such weakness." He activated his communication device. "All ships, begin bombardment sequence. Targets are all human structures and life signs." High above, the Zephyrian fleet adjusted position. Their weapon systems powered up with ominous hums that could be heard even on the planet's surface. Energy began to build in their plasma cannons, preparing to rain death on the helpless colony below. That's when the distress signal reached him. Captain Alex Pale Rider Morrison was alone in his modified Terran Defense Force interceptor 3 days out from Kepler Station when New Haven's desperate transmission crackled through his ship's communication array. He'd been tracking a smuggling operation that had gone cold, leaving him with nothing but empty space and bureaucratic paperwork to look forward to. The message was brief and terrifying. Under attack by unknown alien vessels, requesting immediate assistance. Alex checked his navigation computer. New Haven was 8 hours away at maximum burn. By the time any official help arrived, there wouldn't be anyone left to save. He'd been in the service for 15 years, starting as a grunt marine and working his way up through special operations before accepting a transfer to the TDF's Irregular Warfare Division. His pale complexion and white blonde hair had earned him the nickname Pale Rider during his Marine days, and the name had stuck even after he'd moved into more specialized work. The Interceptor, Reaper's Edge, wasn't much to look at, a single-seat fighter modified for long-range reconnaissance and infiltration. But Alex had made extensive personal modifications over the years. The ship carried experimental weapons, advanced stealth systems, and electronic warfare packages that technically didn't exist according to official records. "Well, Ghost," he said to the ship's AI, "looks like we're going to war." The artificial intelligence responded in a crisp female voice. "Captain, sensors indicate a significant alien fleet at the target coordinates. I count 15 large vessels of unknown design. Recommended course of action is to request backup and monitor the situation." "Negative. Those people don't have time for proper procedures." Alex's hands flew over the control panels, activating stealth systems and plotting an intercept course. "Besides, when has following proper procedures ever been our style?" "Captain, I feel obligated to point out that you're planning to engage an entire alien fleet with a single fighter. The odds of survival approach 0. Alex grinned as he watched his ship's speed climb toward dangerous levels. "Ghost, you worry too much. They've never fought humans before. They have no idea what they're dealing with." The Reaper's Edge streaked through space, pushing its engines beyond safe parameters. Alex monitored the expanding debris field where New Haven should be, hoping he wouldn't arrive to find only wreckage and corpses. Back on New Haven, Kextar was enjoying the mounting terror on the humans' faces as his ships prepared to fire. The colonists had gathered in small groups, holding each other as they waited for death. Some wept. Others stood in stunned silence. "Admiral," Velnoth reported. "All ships report ready to commence bombardment." "Excellent. Begin with the command structures, then systematically eliminate all—" "Sir!" The communications officer's voice cut through the bridge. "Unknown contact approaching at high speed, single small vessel." Kextar's eyes narrowed. "Human reinforcements?" "Possibly, sir. The ship is using some form of stealth technology, but our sensors are tracking it. ETA approximately 4 minutes. "One ship?" Kextar laughed. "Let it come. We'll add its destruction to the bombardment. All vessels delay firing. I want to watch this human die first." The Reaper's Edge dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Haven system, immediately going dark and activating full stealth mode. Alex studied his sensor readings with growing anger. The alien ships were massive, clearly military vessels designed for conquest. On the planet below, he could see the gathered colonists and the alien ground forces. Ghost, how long until they fire? Unknown, Captain. However, weapon charging patterns suggest they are prepared to begin bombardment at any moment. Then we better make this count. Alex armed his weapon systems and began his approach. Target analysis. I need to know how to hurt these things. Scanning. Captain, these vessels employ energy shielding similar to our own, but more advanced. However, I'm detecting what appear to be shield generators on the exterior of each ship. If those could be disabled, the shields would collapse. Beautiful. Alex adjusted his approach vector. Mark targets. We're going in loud. On the bridge of the inevitable dawn, the sensor officer suddenly straightened. Admiral, the human ship has powered weapons and is approaching at attack speed. Kextar stared at his display screens in disbelief. One tiny vessel is attacking us? Does the pilot wish to commit suicide? Sir, should we target the ship? No. Kextar's mandibles spread in a predatory grin. Let it come close. I want to capture this foolish human alive. Perhaps they'll provide more entertainment than the colonists. That decision would prove to be the beginning of the end for the Zephyrian fleet. The Reaper's Edge came screaming in from the night side of the planet, running silent until the last possible moment. Alex had spent years perfecting this kind of attack during skirmishes with pirates and rogue corporations. The key was to hit hard, fast, and exactly where the enemy didn't expect it. His ship's experimental weapon systems came online with a subtle hum. The pulse cannon array had been designed for ship-to-ship combat against heavily armored targets. The quantum torpedoes were prototypes that shouldn't exist according to most arms control treaties, and the electronic warfare package could slice through alien computer systems like a hot knife through butter. Ghost, you getting anything on their communications? Negative, Captain. Their encryption is quite sophisticated. However, I am detecting significant electromagnetic activity consistent with active targeting systems. They're painting us. Let them. Alex's finger hovered over the weapons release. Time to see what these things are made of. At 2 kilometers from the lead ship, the Reaper's Edge suddenly blazed to life. Every stealth system deactivated at once, and the small fighter appeared on Zephyrian sensors like a ghost materializing from thin air. Target acquired! Alex shouted, though only Ghost could hear him. Firing! The pulse cannon array erupted in a stream of concentrated energy that struck the inevitable dawn's forward shield generator dead center. The explosion lit up the night sky as the alien ship's protective barrier collapsed in a cascade of failing energy fields. Before the Zephyrians could react, the Reaper's Edge was already past them, rolling through a complex evasive pattern as enemy fire began to track its position. Impossible! Kextar roared as alarms shrieked across his bridge. How did one small ship penetrate our shields? Sir, they targeted the shield generator specifically. How did they know? I don't care how they knew! Destroy that ship! All vessels, open fire! The space around New Haven erupted in weapons fire as 15 alien warships tried to target one small human fighter. But Alex had spent years learning to fight superior numbers, and he'd never fought an enemy that made targeting so easy. The Zephyrian ships were massive and powerful, but they moved like the technological juggernauts they were. Slow, predictable, designed to overwhelm inferior opponents through sheer firepower. Alex's interceptor danced between their weapons like a leaf in a hurricane, never staying in one place long enough to be hit. Ghost, analyze their firing patterns. Find me weaknesses. Captain, their weapon systems appear designed for large-scale fleet engagements. They're having difficulty targeting such a small, fast-moving craft. Additionally, their shield generators all appear to be externally mounted. External mounting? Alex grinned savagely as he rolled away from another plasma barrage. What kind of idiot puts their most critical systems on the outside of their ships? Evidently the same kind that brings a fleet designed to fight battleships to deal with farmers. Alex lined up on another ship, this time a massive cruiser whose captain was trying to bring heavy guns to bear on the Reaper's edge. The quantum torpedo launched from his ship's belly, a barely visible streak of distorted space-time that struck the cruiser's aft shield generator. The explosion tore through the alien ship's hull, secondary blasts rippling along its length as power systems overloaded and failed. The cruiser began listing to starboard, trailing atmosphere and debris. 2 down, Alex muttered, checking his weapons status. 13 to go. But even as he spoke, he could see the alien formation beginning to adapt. They were spreading out, creating overlapping fields of fire that would be impossible to avoid, and his own ship was already showing stress warnings from the high-G maneuvers required to stay alive. On the planet below, the colonists watched in stunned amazement as a single human fighter held off an entire alien fleet. Sarah Chen found herself holding her breath every time the small ship disappeared behind an explosion or weapons blast, only to emerge seconds later from an impossible angle. "Who is that?" Marcus whispered. "I don't know," Sarah replied, "but they're buying us time. We need to use it." On the bridge of the inevitable dawn, Admiral Kextar was no longer amused. His perfect conquest was turning into a nightmare, and his officers were looking to him for answers he didn't have. "Sir," Velnoth reported, his voice strained, "the human pilot is demonstrating combat capabilities beyond our tactical models. They appear to know exactly where our vulnerable points are located." "That's impossible. Humans are a primitive species. They don't have the technology or experience to—" The ship shuddered as another precise strike took out their secondary shield generator. The Reaper's edge was already gone by the time their return fire reached the attack coordinates. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human ship." "Put it through," Kextar snarled. Alex's voice came through the speakers, calm and controlled despite the impossible battle he was fighting. "Attention, alien fleet. I am Captain Alex Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. You have 60 seconds to withdraw from this system before I stop playing nice." The bridge fell silent. Then Kextar began to laugh, a sound like grinding metal. "Playing nice? You destroy 2 of our ships and call it playing nice?" "Admiral," Alex's voice carried a note of grim amusement, "you ain't seen nothing yet." That's when the Reaper's Edge activated its electronic warfare package, and the real fight began. The electronic warfare package was Alex's personal masterpiece, a combination of human ingenuity and captured alien technology that he'd spent 3 years perfecting. When it activated, the Reaper's Edge became more than just a fighter. It became a digital predator capable of turning enemy systems against themselves. The first sign of trouble for the Zephyrians came when the inevitable Dawn's navigation computer began displaying error messages in ancient Terran Latin. Then the environmental controls started playing classical human music through the ship's communication system. Within moments, Admiral Kextar's proud flagship was broadcasting Ride of the Valkyries at maximum volume, while its weapon targeting systems tried to acquire locks on its own escort vessels. "What is happening to my ship?" Kextar roared, his 4 eyes blazing with fury and confusion. Commander Velnoth frantically worked at his console, trying to regain control of their systems. "Sir, the human appears to have infiltrated our computer networks. I'm reading massive system intrusions across the fleet." On the bridge of the heavy cruiser, Stellar Dominance, Captain Zarmoth watched in horror as his ship's weapons began charging without authorization. "Engineering, cut all power to the weapon systems immediately." "Sir, we can't. The safety locks are engaged, but they're locked in the firing position." The Stellar Dominance's main plasma cannons swiveled toward the frigate, Swift Talon, which was trying desperately to maneuver away from its own ship's compromised targeting systems. Both vessels opened fire simultaneously, their weapons tearing into each other's hulls as their crews watched helplessly. Alex guided the Reaper's Edge through the chaos he'd created, his pale eyes gleaming with fierce satisfaction. The electronic warfare package was working even better than he'd hoped. Years of studying captured alien technology had taught him that most species in the galaxy favored centralized computer networks, a design philosophy that made them incredibly vulnerable to the kind of distributed, adaptive hacking protocols humans had developed. Ghost status report on enemy fleet capabilities. Captain, approximately 40% of enemy vessels are experiencing significant system malfunctions. However, they are beginning to adapt their countermeasures. I estimate we have perhaps 10 minutes before they regain full control. Then we better make those 10 minutes count. Alex armed his remaining quantum torpedoes and selected his next target. Mark the largest ship without current system intrusions. The target was the battlecruiser, Endless Victory, a vessel nearly 3 times the size of the inevitable Dawn, and bristling with enough weapons to destroy a small moon. Its captain, Admiral Vorthak, was Kextar's rival and had been watching the battle with growing alarm. "This is intolerable," Vorthak hissed to his bridge crew. "One primitive human is destroying our entire fleet. All ships under my command form a defensive sphere around my position. We'll coordinate our fire and end this humiliation." But Alex had been monitoring Zephyrian communications since the battle began, and Ghost's translation protocols were remarkably effective. He heard Vorthak's order and smiled grimly. "They want to bunch up? Let's give them a reason to regret that decision." The Reaper's Edge accelerated toward the forming defensive sphere, pushing its engines well beyond safe operational limits. Warning lights flashed across Alex's control panel as his ship's frame groaned under the stress of high-G maneuvers. But he'd flown this fighter for 8 years, knew every bolt and circuit board intimately, and trusted it to hold together for one more impossible stunt. At 5 kilometers from the defensive formation, Alex triggered the ship's experimental jump drive, a prototype system that allowed short-range teleportation jumps. The technology was unstable, dangerous, and had a 30% failure rate. But when it worked, the Reaper's Edge simply vanished from normal space, reappearing 3 seconds later inside the Zephyrian defensive sphere, directly beneath the Endless Victory's primary hull. "Impossible!" Vorthak screamed as alarms shrieked across his bridge. "No ship can teleport through our sensor nets." Alex launched both remaining quantum torpedoes point-blank into the battlecruiser's belly, where the ship's massive reactor core was housed. The explosions sent shockwaves through the vessel's entire structure, and secondary blasts began rippling outward as power conduits overloaded and ruptured. But the Reaper's Edge wasn't finished. As the battlecruiser began to die around him, Alex activated his ship's mining charges, explosives originally designed for asteroid work, but remarkably effective against enemy hulls when properly placed. The small fighter raced along the Endless Victory's length, dropping charges at critical structural points. Each explosion weakened the massive ship's integrity, and within minutes, the pride of Vorthak's fleet was breaking apart from internal stress fractures. "Admiral!" Vorthak's communications officer shouted. "The Endless Victory is breaking up. We're losing structural integrity across all decks." Vorthak stared at his displays in disbelief. His flagship, a vessel that had conquered 6 worlds and destroyed dozens of enemy fleets, was being torn apart by a single human pilot in a fighter that massed less than 1% of his ship's total tonnage. "All vessels," he broadcast on the fleet frequency. "Retreat! Fall back to minimum safe distance. This human is using some form of unknown technology." But Alex wasn't done demonstrating human technology. As the Zephyrian ships began to pull back, he activated the Reaper's Edge's sensor spoofing system. Suddenly, every alien scanner began detecting multiple human ships approaching from all directions. the Zephyrian fleet found itself surrounded by what appeared to be an entire human battle group. Dozens of warships converging on their position. Plasma cannons swiveled frantically as alien commanders tried to acquire targets that weren't really there. "Sir, I'm reading 43 human vessels closing on our position," the sensor officer on the inevitable Dawn reported. 43? Kextar's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Where did they come from?" "Unknown, sir. They appeared simultaneously across a sphere 15 light minutes in diameter." Commander Velnoth studied his own readings with growing suspicion. "Admiral, these sensor returns are too perfect. Identical energy signatures, synchronized movement patterns. I believe we're looking at false readings." "False readings?" Kextar's tail lashed angrily. "Are you suggesting one human pilot is creating phantom ships across an entire star system?" "Sir, that's exactly what I'm suggesting." But even as Velnoth spoke, the Reaper's Edge was proving that sometimes the most dangerous enemy was the one you couldn't see coming. Alex had shut down all active sensors and was running dark, using passive detection methods to track his targets while remaining invisible to their scans. He selected the frigate Swift Pursuit, whose captain was frantically trying to target the Phantom fleet. The small warship was fast and maneuverable, the kind of vessel that might actually pose a threat to Alex's fighter under normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. The Reaper's Edge approached from the frigate's blind spot, a zone directly astern where the ship's sensors had minimal coverage. Alex activated his ship's boarding pod launcher, another modification that technically didn't exist in official records. The pod shot across the gap between the two ships and attached itself to the frigate's hull with magnetic clamps. Inside the pod, a sophisticated computer virus began infiltrating the Zephyrian ship's systems through its external communication array. Within minutes, the Swift Pursuit was broadcasting human military frequencies and responding to Alex's direct commands. Its confused crew watched helplessly as their ship turned its weapons on the rest of the Zephyrian fleet. "This is Captain Tekvar of the Swift Pursuit," came the panicked transmission. "Our ship is no longer under our control. Repeat, we are not responsible for our actions." The sight of one of their own vessels attacking them was the final straw for many Zephyrian commanders. The frigate, Razor Wind, was the first to break formation, its captain deciding that discretion was the better part of valor. The destroyer, Iron Fang, followed moments later, then the cruiser, Stellar Might. "All vessels," Kextar broadcast furiously, "hold your positions. We outnumber this human 15 to 1. 12 to 1, sir," Velnoth corrected quietly, "and decreasing rapidly." Alex watched the Zephyrian formation begin to collapse with professional satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of psychological warfare that human military doctrine emphasized. Make the enemy defeat themselves through fear and confusion rather than rely purely on firepower. But the battle wasn't over yet. 5 Zephyrian ships remained in formation around the inevitable dawn, their crews too disciplined or too terrified of their admiral to retreat. These were the veterans, the ships that had conquered multiple worlds and faced desperate enemies before. Ghost, ammunition status. Captain, you have expended all quantum torpedoes and mining charges. Remaining ordnance consists of standard pulse cannon charges and 1 experimental plasma lance. 1 shot with the lance. Better make it count. Alex studied the remaining ships carefully. The inevitable Dawn was the command vessel, but it was also the most heavily defended, the cruiser. Dark Nebula looked more vulnerable, with visible damage from the earlier chaos. "Sir," the communications officer on the inevitable Dawn reported, "we're receiving another transmission from the human pilot." "Put it through," Kextar snarled. Alex's voice came through the speakers, still calm and controlled. "Admiral, you've lost over half your fleet to 1 human fighter. Your ships are fleeing the system, and your ground forces are trapped on a planet they can't defend. I'm offering you one chance to surrender." "Surrender?" Kextar's roar echoed through the bridge. "The Zephyrian hegemony does not surrender to primitive species." "Wrong answer." The Reaper's Edge suddenly appeared on sensors, diving toward the dark nebula from directly above. The cruiser's captain tried to bring his ship's dorsal weapons to bear, but Alex was moving too fast and too erratically for effective targeting. The experimental plasma lance fired once, a concentrated beam of stellar-grade energy that punched through the dark nebula's hull like it was made of paper. The weapon was a prototype based on captured technology from 3 different alien species, and it performed exactly as advertised. Devastating effectiveness at the cost of massive power consumption and a recharge time measured in hours. The cruiser died instantly, its reactor containment failing as the plasma lance severed critical power conduits. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface, a brief star that outshone New Haven's sun. Down on the planet, the Zephyrian ground forces watched their fleet die with growing desperation. Admiral Kextar had deployed 200 of his best soldiers to secure the human colony, but now they were stranded on a hostile world with no way off. Commander Zach Thule, the ground force leader, activated his communication array. "Admiral, what are your orders? Should we proceed with the elimination of the human colonists?" "Negative." Kextar's voice crackled with static and fury. "Maintain defensive positions and secure the landing zone. We may need those humans as hostages." But Sarah Chen and her fellow colonists were no longer content to wait passively for their fate to be decided. The sight of a single human pilot decimating an entire alien fleet had awakened something in them, a pride they hadn't known they possessed. "Marcus," Sarah whispered to the security chief, "how many of your people are still free?" "About 30. He replied quietly. "They're scattered around the perimeter, staying out of sight." "Good. Signal them. It's time to fight back." Marcus grinned fiercely. "I was hoping you'd say that." The Zephyrian soldiers were veteran warriors, but they were also demoralized and confused. Their supposedly easy conquest had turned into a nightmare, and they found themselves facing an enemy they didn't understand. When the human colonists began their counterattack, it caught the aliens completely off guard. The attack began with improvised explosives placed near the alien landing craft. The bombs were crude devices made from mining equipment and agricultural chemicals, but they were surprisingly effective against Zephyrian technology. The first explosion took out the aliens' primary communication array, cutting them off from their fleet. Then the humans began picking off sentries, using hunting rifles and knowledge of local terrain to devastating effect. The Zephyrian soldiers were powerful and well-equipped, but they were also far from home and fighting an enemy that knew every rock and tree on the battlefield. Marcus led a small team around the aliens' eastern flank, using a mining tunnel to approach their position undetected. When they emerged behind enemy lines, they found Zephyrian soldiers facing outward, expecting attack from the front. The humans opened fire with everything they had, cutting down 6 aliens before the survivors could react. "For New Haven!" Sarah's voice rang out across the battlefield as she led a frontal assault on the alien command post. She was armed with nothing but a mining laser, but her courage inspired the other colonists to follow her into battle. The Zephyrians tried to form defensive lines, but they were facing an enemy that fought like nothing in their tactical manuals. Humans seemed to appear from everywhere, from underground, from rooftops, even from inside buildings the aliens thought they'd secured. Commander Zach Thule found himself trapped in his command vehicle, watching his force disintegrate around him. These weren't the passive prey species he'd expected to find. These humans fought with a desperation and creativity that his warriors couldn't match. "All units," he broadcast on his remaining communication channel, "fall back to the landing craft. Prepare for emergency evacuation." But as the Zephyrians retreated, they found their escape route blocked. Alex had brought the Reaper's Edge down from orbit, landing his fighter directly on top of their primary transport. The alien ship's hull was crushed under the weight of the human vessel, its engines smoking and useless. Alex emerged from his cockpit, a pale figure in a dark flight suit who moved with the controlled grace of a predator. In his hands was a human plasma rifle, a weapon that looked primitive compared to Zephyrian technology, but which had proven its effectiveness in 100 previous conflicts. "Going somewhere?" he asked Commander Zakthul, who was staring at the destroyed transport with growing horror. You're the pilot," the alien commander whispered. "That's right. And you're the ones who made the mistake of threatening innocent people." Alex's voice was cold as winter steel. "Your fleet is broken, your ships are fleeing, and your soldiers are surrendering. This conquest is over." Zakthul looked around at his remaining troops, perhaps 50 warriors out of the 200 he'd started with. The humans were closing in from all sides, armed colonists who had transformed themselves from victims into victors in the space of a few hours. What do you want?" the commander asked. "Simple. You and your people leave this system and never come back. You tell your hegemony that Earth's colonies are under our protection, and that any further attacks will be met with the same response." "You're insane," Zakthul snarled. "The hegemony has thousands of ships, millions of warriors. You cannot fight us all." Alex smiled, and there was no warmth in the expression. "Commander, I just destroyed half your fleet with one fighter. How many more battles like this do you think your people can afford?" In orbit above New Haven, Admiral Kextar was facing the same impossible arithmetic. His magnificent fleet had been reduced to 4 functional ships, and even those were damaged and demoralized. The human pilot's fighter was back in space, somehow having landed on the planet and returned to orbit without being detected. "Sir," Velnoth reported quietly, "the remaining captains are requesting permission to withdraw." Kextar stared at his display screens, watching the debris field where half his fleet now drifted as slowly expanding clouds of wreckage. In 30 years of conquest, he had never seen anything like what this one human had accomplished. "Admiral?" Velnoth prompted. "Signal the fleet," Kextar said finally, his voice hollow with defeat. "All ships retreat to hyperspace jump coordinates. We're leaving this cursed system." "And the ground forces? Leave them. They chose to follow that madman Zakthul. Let them face the consequences." As the surviving Zephyrian ships began their retreat, Alex received a final transmission from the inevitable dawn. Kextar's image appeared on his screen, the alien admiral's face a mask of fury and disbelief. "This isn't over, human," Kextar snarled. "The hegemony will return with greater force. Your species will pay for this humiliation." Alex studied the alien's image calmly. "Admiral, you came here expecting easy prey. Instead, you found something you've never encountered before, humans defending their home. Spread the word to your hegemony. Earth remembers its enemies, and we never forgive an attack on innocents." "One pilot cannot protect an entire species," Kextar replied. "One pilot?" Alex's smile was sharp as a blade. "Admiral, I'm not alone out here. I'm just the first to arrive." And as if summoned by his words, new contacts began appearing on sensors throughout the system. Human ships dropping out of hyperspace, destroyers, frigates, and cruisers bearing the insignia of the Terran Defense Force. The Reaper's Edge had been transmitting everything, and Earth had responded with overwhelming force. The last expression Alex saw on Kextar's face was pure terror as the alien admiral realized the true scope of the trap he'd flown into. The Zephyrian fleet jumped to hyperspace moments later, leaving behind only wreckage and the bitter taste of defeat. On the surface of New Haven, the colonists cheered as they watched the alien ships flee. But Alex wasn't celebrating yet. The battle was won, but the war was just beginning. 3 days after the battle, Admiral Kextar stood before the High Council of the Zephyrian hegemony, his ceremonial armor stripped of its conquest markings. The great chamber on Zephyr Prime had witnessed the planning of 1,000 successful invasions, but today it echoed with the sound of failure. "Explain to us again, Admiral," hissed Counselor Vexmara, her ancient scales gleaming in the chamber's harsh light, "how a single human pilot destroyed half of your fleet." Kextar's mandibles clicked nervously. "Honored Counselor, the human employed technology beyond our current understanding. Electronic warfare capabilities that turned our own ships against us, stealth systems that rendered detection nearly impossible, and weapons that—" "Excuses," interrupted Counselor Zargeth, his 4 eyes burning with contempt. "You brought a fleet capable of conquering worlds to subdue farmers and miners. How does one primitive pilot defeat such overwhelming force?" "Because we underestimated them," Kextar said quietly. The admission tasted like poison. "We assumed humans were weak because their colony lacked obvious defenses. We were wrong. This species fights differently than anything we've encountered." The High Counselor, ancient beyond measure and scarred by centuries of conquest, leaned forward on her throne. "Different how?" "They adapt," Kextar replied, remembering the nightmare of watching his flagship systems turn against itself. Where other species rely on superior numbers or advanced technology, humans rely on ingenuity. They turn their enemies' strengths into weaknesses. And this one pilot, what was his designation? Captain Alex Morrison. The colonists called him Pale Rider. Our intelligence suggests he's part of an irregular warfare division within the Terran Defense Force. The High Counselor's eyes narrowed. "Irregular warfare. Explain." "Unconventional tactics, Honored One. Strike missions, sabotage, psychological warfare. If Morrison represents the average capability of this division—" Kextar's voice trailed off. "Then humanity is more dangerous than we believed," the High Counselor finished. "What of our ground forces?" "Commander Zakthul and his remaining troops surrendered to the human colonists. They are being held prisoner pending negotiations." A ripple of shock ran through the chamber. In the hegemony's 1,000-year history, Zephyrian forces had never surrendered to a lesser species. "This cannot be allowed to stand," growled Counselor Vexmara. "Our reputation across the galaxy depends on our invincibility. If word spreads that humans defeated us—" "Word has already spread," Kextar interrupted, earning himself withering glares from the Council. "The humans recorded everything and transmitted it throughout their communication network. Other species are already requesting the battle footage." The chamber fell silent. Then the High Counselor spoke, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Admiral Kextar, you are relieved of command and banished from the hegemony for your failure. As for the humans—" She paused, considering. "Issue a fleet-wide directive. Human systems are to be avoided until further notice. We will observe this species and learn their capabilities before any further contact." Meanwhile, on New Haven, Alex was having a very different kind of debriefing. Admiral Patricia Sterling of the Terran Defense Force had arrived aboard the heavy cruiser Determination to personally oversee the aftermath of the battle. She sat across from Alex in the colony's temporary command center, reviewing his mission report with obvious amazement. "Captain Morrison," she said finally, setting down her data pad, "in 30 years of military service, I have never read anything quite like this. You engaged a fleet of 15 alien warships with a single fighter and won." Alex shrugged uncomfortably. "I had advantages they didn't expect, Admiral. Superior technology, better training, and the element of surprise. Plus, they made the mistake of bunching up their formations." "Don't minimize what you accomplished here," Sterling said firmly. "Those advantages only matter if someone is skilled enough to use them. What you did was nothing short of miraculous. Through the command center's windows, they could see the colonists working alongside TDF engineers to repair the damage from the battle. Sarah Chen was coordinating reconstruction efforts while Marcus Webb trained a newly formed colonial defense force. The attack had transformed New Haven from a sleepy farming community into a hardened frontier settlement. "What about the prisoners?" Alex asked. "Commander Zach Thule and his people are being held aboard the Determination for now. Intelligence wants to debrief them thoroughly before we decide their fate. The alien technology we've recovered from the battle site should keep our research teams busy for years." Admiral Sterling activated her personal communicator. "Captain Morrison, I'm recommending you for the Distinguished Service Cross. What you accomplished here will be studied in military academies for decades to come." "Thank you, Admiral, but I was just doing my job." "Your job was to investigate smuggling operations. Saving an entire colony from alien conquest was somewhat above and beyond." Over the following weeks, news of the Battle of New Haven spread throughout human space like wildfire. The footage of a single human fighter taking on an alien fleet became the most watched video in Earth's history. Alex found himself transformed from an anonymous intelligence officer into a symbol of human resilience and ingenuity. But the real impact of the battle was felt far beyond human space. On Corvallis Prime, the reptilian Saurian Empire's military council watched the battle footage for the 7th time. General Vac Tess studied the screen as the Reaper's Edge disabled ship after ship with surgical precision. "Remarkable," he hissed to his staff. The human pilot targeted exactly the right systems to achieve maximum disruption with minimal expenditure of ammunition. "Sir, should we be concerned about human expansion into this sector?" asked Colonel Nexavar. "Concerned? No. Interested? Absolutely. A species that can accomplish this much with so little is worth watching carefully." General Vacates smiled, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Perhaps it's time to open diplomatic relations with Earth." Similar conversations were taking place throughout the galaxy. The Crystalline Consortium updated their threat assessments to classify humans as potentially valuable allies. The Void Shepherds marked Terran space as dangerous but fascinating. Even the reclusive Machine Collective took notice, sending automated probes to study human military doctrine. The Zephyrian hegemony found themselves increasingly isolated as former allies began questioning their military supremacy. If humans could defeat Zephyrian forces so decisively, what did that say about the hegemony's ability to protect its vassals? On the trade world of Nexus Station, Merchant Captain Veltarin listened to her crew debate the implications of the human victory over dinner in the station's main cantina. "I'm telling you," insisted her engineer, a multi-armed Hectari named Clixar. "Any species that can pull off what this Pale Rider did is not to be underestimated. The humans may look primitive, but they think 3 moves ahead." "It was one pilot," argued the ship's navigator, a gas-breathing Vorthan. "You cannot judge an entire species by the actions of one individual." "Can't you?" Veltarin interjected. "That one pilot had technology the Zephyrians couldn't match, tactics they couldn't counter, and skills they couldn't comprehend. If Earth can produce one such warrior, they can produce others." The debate continued throughout the cantina, with representatives from dozens of species sharing their thoughts on what the human victory meant. The consensus was clear. Humanity had announced itself as a new power in galactic affairs, and that announcement had been written in Zephyrian wreckage. 6 months after the battle, Alex found himself back on Kepler Station, officially assigned to the TDF's new Alien Contact Division. His mission had expanded from tracking smugglers to preparing humanity for the larger galactic community they had suddenly found themselves part of. The Reaper's Edge had been upgraded with technology reverse-engineered from captured Zephyrian equipment, making it even more formidable than before. But Alex's real weapon wasn't his ship or his technology. It was the reputation that preceded him wherever he went. "Captain," Ghost said as they approached their next assignment, "sensors indicate a distress call from the mining colony on Titan's Rest. Unknown vessels are demanding tribute." Alex studied the sensor readings with professional interest. 3 ships of unfamiliar design were orbiting the small mining operation, their weapons trained on the settlement below. "Pirates?" he asked. "Possibly, sir. However, their ship configurations suggest they may be from one of the species that has heard about your previous exploits." "Then let's go introduce ourselves." Alex activated the communication array. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. State your business in this system." The response came immediately, in accented but understandable English. "Captain Morrison, the famous Pale Rider. We are humble traders from the Cathari Republic. We were, conducting negotiations with the miners." "Negotiations that involve holding weapons on civilian targets?" "A misunderstanding. We withdraw immediately." Alex watched with amusement as the 3 ships broke orbit and fled the system at maximum burn, leaving behind only confused miners and the growing legend of human military prowess. "Ghost, make a note in the log. Contact resolved through diplomatic intimidation. No shots fired." "Noted, Captain. Your reputation appears to be an even more effective weapon than your armament." And that reputation continued to grow. Within a year of the Battle of New Haven, the phrase Pale Rider had entered the lexicon of a dozen alien languages, usually translated as death from unexpected directions or victory through impossible odds. The Zephyrian hegemony learned to avoid human space entirely, while other species began seeking trade agreements and mutual defense pacts with Earth. The galaxy had learned a crucial lesson. Humanity might be new to the cosmic stage, but they were not to be underestimated. On New Haven, now a thriving frontier world with its own defense fleet, Sarah Chen stood in the colony's memorial garden. A simple stone monument marked the spot where the battle had begun, bearing the names of the 3 colonists who had died in the fighting. But the memorial also carried another inscription. In memory of the day, humanity learned it was not alone in the universe. And the universe learned it was not prepared for humanity. Marcus Webb, now the colony's military commander, joined her beside the monument. "Any regrets?" he asked. "About what?" "About not staying a simple farming colony. Life was simpler before alien invasions and galactic politics." Sarah smiled, looking up at the stars where human patrol ships now kept watch. "Simple isn't always better, Marcus. Before the Zephyrians came, we were just another small settlement on the edge of nowhere. Now we're part of something bigger. Humanity has a place in the galaxy because people like Alex Morrison were willing to fight for it." Above them, running lights marked the passage of the TDF patrol cruiser, New Haven's Pride, named in honor of the colonists who had refused to surrender. The ship's captain was a former farmer named Peter Holbrook, one of the colonists who had fought alongside Marcus during the ground battle. The galaxy had learned not to underestimate humans, but it had also learned that heroes could emerge from the most unexpected places. In the depths of space, Alex received another distress call, this time from a human science vessel that had discovered an ancient alien artifact. Their investigation had awakened something that had been sleeping for 1,000,000 years, and now they needed help dealing with the consequences. "Ghost, plot a course for the Discovery. Looks like we have another situation." "Captain, may I observe that your definition of situation has expanded considerably since our first encounter with alien forces?" "That's the thing about being the Pale Rider, Ghost. The job description keeps getting more interesting. The Reaper's Edge turned toward its new destination, carrying with it the hopes of humanity and the promise that no matter what the galaxy threw at them, humans would find a way to not just survive, but triumph. Behind them, New Haven continued its quiet revolution from farming colony to strategic outpost. But ahead lay greater challenges, stranger encounters, and the endless possibility that somewhere in the vast galaxy there were species who had not yet learned the lesson of the Pale Rider. The Zephyrians had been certain of their victory until one human pilot proved them wrong. They would not be the last to make that mistake. In the grand calculus of galactic power, humanity had announced itself not through massive fleets or overwhelming technology, but through the simple principle that had guided Alex Morrison throughout the Battle of New Haven. When protecting something worth defending, humans would always find a way to win. The Pale Rider had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same.